Greetings, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar from the Junto Institute. My name is Raman Chadha. I'm one of the founders of Junto, and I'm really happy to have you joining us today for the next webinar in our series related to emotional intelligence. We're going to be joined by Patrick Tannous in a moment. He is the co-founder and president of TS2T, and one of our alumni, and someone who has really worked pretty hard at his emotional intelligence, and in particular, his empathy and social awareness. For those who haven't been with us at a prior emotional intelligence webinar, we've done 3 of them already this spring. And if you'd like to watch any of them or simply take a look at the notes, they're on our blog. And if you see our URL at the very bottom left of the screen, just click on content and blog, and you'll be taken straight to that page where you can find each of these webinars. So we are going to ask you guys to help us with our empathy. Over the last month or so since we've been doing these webinars, we've actually found it really hard to kind of sense how people are feeling, what they're thinking, only because, as you probably know, your video and audio are disabled. And so as a result, we have no sense of whether you're enjoying this, you're not enjoying it, whether you're confused, and so on. So we're going to ask you to do a couple of things, please. Number one, you'll see at the bottom of your screen chat and Q&A buttons when you hover over the very bottom of your Zoom window. We're going to ask you to share your emotions, thoughts, and questions, as well as your reactions via the chat button. That chat is only happening with us. So it's not being shared with all of the webinar attendees. And then the Q&A button is shared with others. So if you do want to post a question so that other people can take a look at it, sometimes it helps to kind of create some momentum of other people asking questions. But my point here is that it'll help us if you just tell us whether you're enjoying this, whether you're feeling happy about what you're hearing, whether you're confused, and so on. And what we can then do is make sure that we clarify things for you if necessary, but it'll also just make us feel good. So hopefully it'll be something that you can help us out with by sharing your emotions and reactions as we go through today's session. So I'm going to begin with an overview of what emotional intelligence is. And we at the Junto Institute believe that it's not a body of knowledge, but instead it's a skill set. And it is a very important ability for us to do several things. Number one is the ability to recognize and regulate the emotions in ourselves and in others. Number two is our ability to discriminate amongst those emotions, to identify them, label them with words, and then also reflect on why they exist. And both of these, as you can tell, relate to things that we do. And in terms of recognizing and regulating and kind of identifying. But the most important part of emotional intelligence where it becomes a skill set is when we actually put it to use. And the way that we do that from a kind of a conceptual standpoint is to actually allow it to guide how we think, how we behave, and what we say to other people, and keeping in mind that we're doing that in a virtuous way. There is truth to the fact that emotional intelligence can be used for evil or for negative purposes. At Junto, we are firm believers that this is a virtuous skill set and we want to use it for good. We've been doing this work for about 7+ years, and about 2 years ago, in speaking with a number of our alumni, we were hearing their experiences and started to notice that there was almost like a path towards building strong emotional intelligence skills. And so we recognize that the domains of emotional intelligence that you see here, the 4 domains, actually had an order to some degree. And there was a systemized way for us to build these skills. And as a result, what we started to do was relate these concepts in the form of building blocks. And over the past 2+ years, we have received a lot of positive feedback from our audience, our clients, and the people who attend these webinars, that these building blocks allows emotional intelligence to make a little bit more sense than it did prior. So I'm just briefly going to display the blocks for the first 2 levels. We've already done webinars on those 2. We're not going to go into detail because today's session, as you know, is on empathy and social awareness. So these are the 4 building blocks for self-awareness, which we believe is the foundation for building our emotional intelligence. The second level is self-management. It's when we're acting on our self-awareness and we're starting to do things. If you go back to that definition that was in the prior screen, recognize and regulate the emotions in ourselves and others. That's where we're talking about self-management. And then today we're going to talk about the 4 building blocks, but more importantly, have Patrick share a lot of his experiences and views on how he puts empathy and social awareness to use. The first building block is sensing other people's feelings and perspectives. And this is one of the 2 building blocks that's devoted to empathy in particular. The second block that's devoted to empathy is taking an active interest in other people. So there's one thing, it's one thing when I'm sensing and feeling things in others, it's another thing when I'm actually taking an active interest. And the key word there is active. The third building block in social awareness is when we're able to read other people and especially their relationships. And if we're in a room, the emotional currents in that room, and if we're in a virtual room, it becomes really hard to do that, right? Because even if I know that 2 of you are in a Zoom room, I have a close relationship, it's almost impossible for me to read that because you're 2 separate squares on my screen. And unless I see the 2 of you talking with one another or see it in the chat or otherwise get some signs, it's really hard to do that. Then the fourth building block for social awareness is when we start to understand how we can work with other people and serve them. In other words, we're putting our empathy to use now. I'm sensing how people see the world and what they're feeling. I'm reading the relationships and currents that might exist amongst them and with me. And then I'm starting to figure out in my head how I can actually work with them. So it's with those 4 building blocks that we're going to kind of work off of here today in this conversation with Patrick Tannous. So like I said, I'm really happy to have Patrick here with us. He's one of our alumni, one of the co-founders of TS2T and also president. Started the company with his business partner and co-founder, Dan Klein. And the company has been around for 10 years, founded in 2010. They currently have about 20 employees and they're in over 7,000 stores around the world. They've been doing a pretty robust business online over the last couple of months. And so we're really happy also to know that the business is not only staying afloat, but hopefully positioning itself for some strength down the road. So I want to formally welcome Patrick into the webinar, and we're going to kick things off with an emotion wheel check-in.
Hello, Robin. Thanks for having me. So I am feeling today, I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous. I usually don't get nervous, but for some reason, this has my heart pumping a little harder than usual. And then I'm feeling pretty eager. It's a beautiful day outside, and I'm going to be running over to my distribution center after this to see some of my teammates. So I'm excited and eager to get this going and share some of my experiences, and hopefully they're helpful. Truly,
I'm sure they're going to be. I'm feeling very pleased and content and peaceful and tranquil and serene. So at about the 7 o'clock marker here on the wheel. And for those who aren't familiar with this, this is a tool we use at the Junto Institute, back to this idea of labeling our emotions and being able to share them with other people. So thanks for that, Patrick. And we're gonna
your background kind of mimics your emotion, peaceful and tranquil. I like it.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and I'm going to hand it over to Patrick to begin with an overview of kind of his thoughts and some general experiences with empathy and social awareness.
Awesome. So thanks again, Raman. And I guess the first thing is just, it's so weird to do this and not be able to read a room and see people. You know, that general feeling of being able to read a room, see what people are thinking or feeling can usually help me guide a conversation as to where it needs to go. And through these times, we obviously don't have that. And so this is the first time I've ever addressed what I'll call a crowd without being able to see them. And what that does is it slightly limits what I'll call the superpower that I have of social awareness, and the superpower that could be social awareness. Social awareness is something that I've been fortunate to have, and I've been blessed with it. It's one of my main skills. It's one of the things that I just God gave me. And with that, I'll talk about some of the, I guess, some of how my thoughts develop in social situations and social scenarios, and also how those can affect me. There's definitely been times where my social awareness is so high and so aggressive that it takes over my mind, truly, where all I can think about is the settings around me. And it has led to, and my wife's aware of this, in certain settings, social settings, I turn to alcohol because I am so overwhelmed mentally, because my social awareness level it doesn't stop. I'm always thinking about the people around me. What are they thinking? What are they who's conversing? What's going on in the room? And what that does is it allows me to understand what's going on, and properly applicate myself or others that I'm around. But also sometimes it drives you crazy. And I'll be the first person to just admit my faults and admit my strengths. And unfortunately, some of the faults I have come from this strength. And it's one of those things where, look, what am I doing? I put on a blazer and a shirt for you guys, right? That's because that's my social awareness. I feel much better when I'm when I dress properly. And even something as small as the way you dress and going into settings is a big piece of your social awareness. And so one of the stories I'll bring up, I wanted to have a better setting than this in my background, but Round was pushing me to get a little quicker on my Zoom app, but you can see my setting here at home. It's very peaceful. But one of the things that I'll bring up a story in which what are you drinking, sir? Come on, Ramen. Joe T? Sorry. So one of the things that I'll bring up a story in which my awareness just starts taking over. And my people know about it. My team knows about it. But we were having a holiday party, and we're raising capital, like we always are. And one of the investors happened to send his girlfriend / fiance to the holiday party, and he sent her there without him being there. So it was one of those things where, okay, we have a holiday party. My team gets together. They bring all their friends, and it's a big group environment where everyone kind of knows each other, except for this investor's girlfriend who was coming in, and no one knew her. And so that party, instead of, it was a holiday party, and you're supposed to enjoy that with your team and with your friends and with everybody that around you. But instead of enjoying it, I was so focused on making sure we took care of this person. So always making sure that she had someone to talk to, making sure that she was comfortable in whatever setting she was in, trying to make sure I would put her in touch with, my colleagues or employees that I know she would connect with. And it drove me up the wall. But at some point, I trained for emotional intelligence to try and get that away. That's what I'm trying to stop doing. But in the moment, then I can't really do anything about it, But when I sit here now and kind of look back at that scenario, it takes the fun out of social settings in some situations. And that night, I ended up just drinking a lot, and that was kind of my way of getting over the social awareness that led to social anxiety, which that's the negative of just having such a heightened level of awareness at all times. And it just makes it so difficult, now. When you're in a room that's when you can use these powers, or I'll call it a power because I don't think everybody has it, but it's when you can use these powers to feel things, right? And now with this remote BS, you can't feel. You know, one of the hardest things is I can't, you know, at the very least when I'm speaking to people, there's this general reaction, right? Either you say something or you there's a verbal cue that gives you the idea that you're talking in the right direction, right? You don't have that now. And it's really, really difficult. And it leads for a lot of uncertainty when you don't know how people are feeling, and you don't really know how you can act to make them feel better because you don't know the feeling they have as a starting point. And that's been kind of difficult. So with that, I think, is there any questions you want me to answer around that, Raman?
Actually, what I'd like you to do is, you started that with talking about how this is something that you've been good at and comes naturally to you. For people like me who, for whom that does not apply, it's kind of hard to process. And so can you share a little bit more about your discovery of this, you know, gift that you have, superpower, and how you also kind of struggle with it at times?
The discovery of it, I don't really know how to explain it, but probably from a very young age, I knew that I had something, just because I had this ability to connect with other people. And I was always that kid in school who didn't, I did really bad in school, but I had so many friends, and I was always the guy that everybody could relate to. And part of empathy is, in order to connect with somebody, you have to connect with how they're feeling and use that to act on how you act. And so I guess I discovered it. I didn't know it was a superpower until I started taking Junto, and really understood kind of the science behind it. You know, for example, one thing that's kind of crazy is I cry a lot. I'm like the biggest crybaby you'll ever meet in your life. And I don't really understand what that is. I never did, but spending a lot of time understanding the brain and trying to understand how it works a little bit. I do now understand why I cry. And that's because I can literally put myself in someone's shoes and feel what they're feeling to the point where I can cry with them. It is so weird. Like watching movies, I'll cry. Sometimes watching the news, I'll cry. I mean, Raman can attest to this, but every time we have a conversation, when we have a deep conversation, which we probably do at least once a quarter, we'll have a dinner. And I usually tear up at least once in our dinner because of something that we found that truly connected us. And it connected us to such a level where I could feel what he was feeling and vice versa, to where it just brought me to tears. And then there's some people like Raman, or well, I shouldn't say like Raman, like other people who don't cry, right? Who don't cry as often. And in the male world, generally speaking, crying is not that cool. And so a lot of people try not to cry. And I don't know, for me, it's when I do cry and I cry in front of people, it means that there's something between us that I truly love and admire, and helps us drive further. And it signifies what I'll call the rawest passion and the rawest emotion you can have. And it's uncovered, unfiltered, and totally vulnerable. And that's one of what I'll call negatives, but again, it has some positives. If any of you guys watched Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, you know, a lot of them right now are talking about how he started crying when he started talking about his passion for competition. And that was, you know, that was raw. You could feel it. You could feel that this guy was misunderstood because of his passion for competition. And I don't know, seeing him cry made me feel just how important it was to him and just how misjudged he was for how he acted on the basketball court.
Thanks, Patrick. So you brought up a couple of things that I want to kind of go further on here, ask you to elaborate on. Number one is you talked about being in someone else's shoes. And as you know, we talk a lot about how there's 3 different types of empathy. And would love for you to share a little bit more about the 3 different types of empathy.
Sure.
Let's start there,
So,
and then we'll go into the second item. Go ahead.
yeah. So the first type of empathy is cognitive empathy. Simply being aware of the situation. That will be your cognitive empathy, understanding someone's feelings. That's the cognitive part. The second part is emotional empathy. So taking an active interest, actually caring. So knowing someone's hurt and then caring about it would be the emotional empathy. And then the third part is the I forgot the phrase for it, but it's acting on both the cognitive and the empathetic part, and actually going out and doing something about it. So well, actually, the first would be.
I'll add, Patrick. You got 2 of them, because the third one is the one that comes naturally to you, which is the emotional empathy, right? Where you're feeling. Right. So the cognitive is where you're understanding what someone is experiencing, what they're feeling, and you can process it intellectually. Second one is that emotional thing, which you just feel, like you said, you're able to just pick that up right away. And then go ahead with the third one.
And then the third one is acting on the emotions that you sense. So if someone's, I can give some examples of it, but basically actually doing something, not just understanding it and being aware of it and feeling it, but doing something about it. It drives you to have a different behavior because you understood the first 2 pieces of empathy. And that third, it truly, in my opinion, every company needs a leader that can drive decisions based off of the empathy of others. And I have a great example of that taking place in my organization over the last, I would call it, week. But we can get into that when we're ready. But those are the 3 you taught me.
So actually, go ahead into that story, and then what we're going to do is, since you've already shared now a couple experiences and personal reflections, once you tell this story after that, then we're going to kind of walk through a handful of ways that we can actually put our empathy and social awareness to use. So I'll go ahead and share my screen at that point, but would love you to tell that story, because when we were preparing for this, it really resonated for me personally as something that Patrick does, and I was totally able to kind of envision him doing what he did, but it's just the nuances, and which at the surface seem so simplistic, but in truth, there are people like Patrick for whom this comes naturally, and then there are people like myself for whom it doesn't come as naturally, so it really requires a conscious effort. So I'm going to pass it back on to you, Patrick, to share that story.
Yeah, so I'll share 2 stories. The first is regarding my team and how I acted based on how I saw them reacting to a certain situation. So we've been very busy at TS2T due to COVID-19. We've seen an influx in e-commerce orders. And so what that does is it requires more work for my employees. For us, tons of orders are great, but for my employees, it's just more work, right? And so I went in there the other day. I'm very fortunate to have our distribution center, because I can get out of the house and go there and still get a feel for those teammates. And now we do have a sales and marketing office, which I can't get a feel for those guys. But I went in there on a Friday. We had just had our biggest day it was a Black Friday day on a Thursday in the middle of May. Right. And so we had to cancel some team meetings. My COO called me in the morning. He's like, listen, we just had a crazy day yesterday. The guys are going to be super slammed. Cancel this meeting. Fine. So I go there and I go to the back, and one of my employees came up to me. He's like, hey, I want you to come to the back and just see what's going on. So I come back there, and it was silent. They generally have a lot of music playing. They generally have some chitter chatter, yelling at each other, making fun of each other, whatever. It was a lot of silence. And then there was some box throwing, heavily, right? You can just hear the boxes dropping in a stronger way than normal. And so I thought to myself, all right, these guys are pissed. They're going to need to come in Saturday, which sucks because we got so many orders, and that's part of their job. And so I tried to look at them and try and talk to them, and you could just tell they did not want to talk or do anything. So I just told them all, I said, all right, guys, don't worry about lunch. Lunch is on me today. And at 12:15, I had a nice sushi buffet waiting for all of them. Generally, if we buy them lunch, it might be Jimmy John's or Ramy's or whatever. But because of the situation, I decided to buy them sushi. Spent a little more than normal, and went back there at around 12:15 and said, guys, I got some sushi. You better get over there because I don't want Corey to eat it all, or I don't want Ruben to eat it all. And first one first goes. And by that time, we had the entire warehouse team in the back room eating sushi together, talking and laughing, and we brought it back, right? And so rather than going into the weekend with negativity and negative energy from our team, understanding how they felt, and then usually I would just ask them, what do you guys want for lunch? And they would tell me, and I just said, fuck it. They don't even want to talk right now. Like, that's how pissed they are. I'll just buy them something super nice. And so I did. And a couple of the guys sent me Slack message after just saying, hey, Patrick, thanks for doing that. I feel much better. And what Raman and I spoke about was that those guys felt that way, I think, because they didn't feel that they were getting the recognition that they deserved. As I said earlier, it's great for us to see the orders when you're working on my side of the desk, but when you're in the warehouse and it just turns into more work, it's not that cool. And so rewarding them and recognizing them was so important. And that's not gonna fix everything, right? That's not going to fix any. That was a one-time fix, but understanding those situations when they come up and being prepared to act in those situations, I think really is important for organizations that can help their employees through turmoil in which they might not be feeling the best. And then there's another story, and one that I'm particularly proud of. It just kind of surfaced, and the result came in this morning. So I didn't really talk to you about it, Rob. But basically, I'm not going to use any of my team names, but John and Jack work very closely together. John was one of my first people, and John trained Jack into a role that Jack's now thriving in. And there's still a couple things from previous that we reward John for that Jack actually does. And so I set up a meeting with one of my employees to go over something. I set it up with John, and Jack sent me an email saying, hey, why wasn't I included in that meeting? I'm the one who does most of the work. Yeah, sure, Jack started it, but now I'm the one who does it. Why didn't you include me? And she didn't say it it was a very nice way. And so I told that I calmed down, checked my emotions, didn't react right away. And I ended up apologizing to that person for not including them in the meeting, rather than using my authority and saying, hey, listen, I can meet with whoever I want, whenever I want. You don't need to tell me. I apologize. And the reason why was because I realized that person just cared. That's all the reason why they reached out. And it was probably so hard for them to send the owner of the company that message. And that's how much they cared. And so rather than trying to tell her what and do, I just said, sorry, my fault. I'll include you next time. And then furthermore, I noticed some negative energy between John and Jack recently. And I don't think it was anything that Jack did to John. I think it's the way we recognize Jack without recognizing John. And so I've recently pulled some levers to make sure and spoke with Jack to make sure that we're recognizing John a little more And Jack was all about it, all for it, super excited. And so hopefully once I implement that, which I got word of this morning, the negative energy between John and Jack will subside. And so I think the negative energy started because of us, not because of them, if that makes any sense. So it was understanding the negative energy between some of my people, and trying to act on it, knowing that it wasn't, they didn't hate, they weren't negative towards each other because of one or the other. It was because of us. I don't know how to really explain that, but I'm proud to identify that and be able to change it quickly.
Right, thank you. So I'm going to ask you to kind of now apply that to these 3 types of empathy, right? And pick either story that you want, either the
We'll do the warehouse.
Okay, yeah. So talk about how you were able to cognitively empathize with them, emotionally empathize with them, and then compassionately empathize with them.
So cognitively, the minute we saw those orders, on the sales side, you get excited, but on the operational side, it's not that exciting because the work just goes up. So immediately I was aware that, okay, there's going to be an opportunity for some negative emotions right now because of the heightened level of orders. So that was the cognitive part. The emotional was going in the back, or I'm sorry, what's the second one? Cognitive?
And then emotional, yeah.
And then emotional. The emotional one was going in the back and actually feeling it, right? Just feeling the way that the energy in the room was super low. The human connection just wasn't happening. And so I could feel that, and it brought me down, and then the last piece was acting on that emotion. And that was just making a decision that I'm going to buy them a really nice lunch, take them out of their work, even though they were slammed busy. I told their boss, I said, I'm taking them out of work at 12:15. Took them all out, stopped what they were doing, and we just took an hour together. And that was me acting on what I noticed they felt and how I felt they felt.
Great, thank you for doing that. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to walk through now. We're going to show again the 4 building blocks that we shared a little bit earlier, in case any of you missed that. And then we'll just use that as a guide to share some general practices and experiences on putting our empathy and social awareness to use, especially during this period that we're all going through.
Yeah, and I think if I had to if I could describe empathy in simpler phrase, it's really just feeling with people. It's feeling with them and that's how I would really describe it. It's feeling what they're feeling.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that prompted me to think about something that people always confuse empathy with, which is sympathy. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, what are the differences between the two? And do you want to share a little bit about that? Yeah, especially when you stress the fact that empathy is feeling with someone.
Yeah, sympathy is feeling for someone, which are 2 majorly different things. And you'll hear people toss around the phrase sympathy and empathy, the word sympathy and empathy all the time. They're totally different. And I can give you kind of a visual, if you will. Just try to draw this picture with me. Imagine a guy is, digging a hole and in his grass, and he falls through a hole, and he goes down, 10 feet in his grass, and he's down in a little cave in his lawn. And another guy goes up to him and looks down, and you see this guy all the way down at the bottom. Being sympathetic would just know that he's there, and you feel bad for him. You're eating your sandwich. You're just like, oh man, poor guy, he's down there. What can we do? Nah, that sucks. Empathetic would be getting down there with him, actually finding a rope or a ladder and going down the hole with the guy who's stuck down there. And then once you get to the bottom of the hole, you know exactly what he's feeling, and you can empathize with him. And that is the difference that between empathy and sympathy. Going down that hole it's not a lot of fun, right? It's not a lot of fun to go down that hole and get to the, you know, a cave and you're stuck. But it's a lot, you know, it's easy to look from the top and say, oh shit, that poor guy over there. And that's something that we did in, you know, my company acts on that all the time, right? I shouldn't say all the time, but our Spread the Warmth initiative with the people in Chicago, that's just passing out hot tea to the homeless people. And that's because I always have hot tea in my cup during the winter. And we were driving around and I see these poor people freezing to death on the side of the streets underneath the underpass. And so that was the understand. So the cognitive part was understanding, oh shit, it's freezing outside. All the homeless people must be so cold. The second was, you know, going out and understanding by seeing them and, you know, feeling the cold myself. And then the third part was telling my team, you know what, once a year, we're going to go out and pass out hot tea to these people. We're not just going to sit here and feel bad for them. That's what a lot of people do that have sympathy, but we had empathy. And so once a year we go out and pass out hot tea to the homeless people with gloves and scarves and other things. And same thing happened with water wells in Nigeria. I'm very proud to say that my team, you know, a lot of people talk about, bad, you know, no access to clean water. Well, yeah, we feel that, and we acted on it by building 2 water wells in Nigeria for people who don't have access to clean water. Right. So my team embodies the empathy that I believe I have, and they help turn our company into an empathetic company as opposed to a sympathetic company. Right. Something as simple as we got it accepted for the PPP loan, and we were in an Inc. magazine article. And one of my colleagues, we were talking about posting it on LinkedIn. And we both agreed not to post it on LinkedIn because we were in a very fortunate situation to receive that loan, and we didn't want to really rub it in other people's faces. So we decided not to post that. It was the Inc. magazine stating that we received 220 grand, right? And so we didn't want other people to see that, and we felt bad for others if they would have seen that because they weren't in that situation.
Thanks, Patrick. And I'll add one more thing about Spread the Warmth that you might find fun to hear about, which is just yesterday, I found my t-shirt from one of your past events, and on the outer ring was the word compassion. I can't remember what it says, community compassion, and there might have been 1 or 2 more words. But it was pretty cool to see that, because that's really what Spread the Warmth is, right? Any type of community activity, if you will, where we're doing something for other people. And it's that second building block of taking an active interest, we're taking action. So I appreciate that kind of coming full circle, whether it was by design or not. It was just really cool to see that. Okay, so let's kind of share some ways that we can use our social awareness on a day-to-day basis. This is something that many of us are engaging in to an extent. I know that one of the common things that we're all doing right now is simply asking people, how are they doing? How are they faring during quarantine, during lockdown, especially people who are being affected in other ways, whether it's their employment, sick family members, and so on. What we're getting to here is a twist on that, where we're asking others how they're actually feeling. Because what that does is it allows us to then engage our empathy, the 3 different types of empathy that we've already referred to. The second one, and Patrick, I want you to share a little bit about this. We talk so critically about the importance of listening. Listening is how we gather data from people. That is so much more than what we could if we weren't actively listening. In fact, it might be the most powerful empathy skill that we can employ. And at Ajunto, we use the phrases deep listening or generous listening to be able to identify that listening is not just with our ears, that we listen with our eyes and we also listen with our body. And I know this is something that Patrick pays a lot of attention to and takes really seriously. So Patrick, would love for you to talk a little bit about this.
Sure. The one quote, so I'll start it by giving a quote that I find to be very powerful. And that quote is, when you listen with empathy to another person, you give that person psychological air. And that's truly how I would look at listening to somebody is. And not just listening when you're talking about, oh yeah, what happened here or there. It's listening when there's what I'll call a real issue at hand. And giving somebody, the quote again was, when you listen with empathy to another person, you give that person psychological air. You're giving that person an opportunity to vent and to get a lot of things off their chest. And that's the air that you're giving them. And I think that there's listening is such an overused term, but what I'll challenge you to do is, when someone comes and talks to you, turn your entire body towards them. Stop everything you're doing. Square up, right? Square up so that your shoulders and your legs are truly squared up, and put all of your focus into this person when they're talking to you. The outcome will be magical. You'll make that person feel incredible, and you'll give them a sense of relief because you're taking in what they have to offer. You're sharing the feeling that they have, that they're going through, and you're accepting some of that feeling with them to be a part of what they're feeling. And that gives them a sense of relief, or at least I think it gives them a sense of relief. And that to me is why listening, and it's so hard. Let me tell you, you got to be super conscious of when you're doing it, because sometimes you just want to do your own damn thing and you don't want to give people all that attention. But it's extremely impactful. And then, yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I want to also mention that during this period where we're working from home and not spending time with people in person, many of us are using obviously not just devices, but in some cases multiple devices in communicating. So especially for business purposes, I'm on calls regularly with people who have two monitors. I just use my laptop, so it's easy for me to look at the screen and the camera's right in the middle. But when people have two monitors, and let's say they're sitting like this, and they've got one monitor here where they're reading something. So in this case, maybe I have my slides on a monitor here and I'm looking at it. I'm not making eye contact with all of you folks. And so one of the things that I struggle with is experiencing that. And so even when I'm in a situation where, even though I've only got one laptop, sometimes I've got my notes handy or my iPad or phone because I've got things I'm referencing to, is I'll make it a point to mention to them that if I look away, it's because I'm looking at something to help in my conversation. And I've noticed in the last few weeks, more and more people are starting to do that who have these multiple monitors. They'll say, I'm going to be looking at you this direction, but just wanting you to know that if I turn and I look over here, it's because I've got another monitor here or a third monitor here, and I'm getting information for this conversation that we're having. Whereas when we're in person, we can see that, right? You can see me shift over and say, let me look at the data, and then I come back to you and speak to you when you're across the table from me. But when we're in a virtual environment, it's much more difficult to do that. And so the idea here is we can also help other people listen more effectively if we're prompting them accordingly with the situation that we're in. Okay, the third thing is reading nonverbal.
Yeah, and I think what you just brought up, Raman, what you just brought up is what I'll call the opposite of listening generously. Think about how it feels when you're on a call and you just hear someone typing. How brutal is that, right? That's the worst feeling in the world. And I'm at the point now where if I hear people typing on a call and they don't tell me that they're taking notes, I'm assuming they're not listening. And so my tone goes way down, my activity levels on the call go way down, and you pretty much just want to get the hell off the call. And so that's what I would call the opposite of listening generously, is listening like I don't want to use the word, but yeah. So that's one thing that needs to be restated, and I would suggest everybody who's trying to become better at listening does what Raman just said, which is let the person know if you're doing something. let the person know if you are taking notes. If you're taking notes, that's fine. Just tell me so that when you're typing, I don't think you're doing an email, right? And what, as Raman just said, if you're taking notes, we actually had a call yesterday, Raman, and I told you I was taking notes, not even knowing that you said that. So it's, yeah, just make sure the person knows that you're not, lollygagging while they're talking. That's a waste of someone else's time.
Right. And again, flipping back, where if you're the one who is speaking to me, and again, I've got the dual monitor, the third monitor, it very well might be that I say to you, I'm listening. I'm just taking a look at these other notes. The truth is I might be listening, but I'm not listening generously, right? Because I'm trying to process two different things. And all the science has shown us that we cannot multitask as human beings. It's not a thing. We cannot devote 100% attention to two different things. We have a finite amount of attention as human beings. And so once I shift over to the other monitor, I've instantly gone from 100% to 50%. And that fluctuates them back and forth, right? So as I'm reading something that's on this monitor, I'm actually not able to listen to every single word Patrick is saying, and I'm not able to pick up on tone of voice, nonverbals, et cetera. So one other reason why it's so important for us to be able to, again, listen generously by giving ourselves to other people. Patrick, you talked a little bit about this earlier, which is reading nonverbals. And I'll share with everybody here on the webinar that we intentionally made a change with how we're doing these webinars by activating the full speaker view for these sessions. And the reason was because when that wasn't the case, when we're not sharing the screen, you folks wouldn't be able to see our nonverbals. And so, we're just a small little box on your monitor, a small little rectangle. And as a result, we realize what would be helpful is for us to be able to have you read our nonverbals. And so you'll see we've got a little tip for that on the next slide that we can all put into use. Patrick talked about cognitive empathy, and basically a real simple way to remember that is using the phrase, I understand. Understand is comprehension, intellectual kind of engagement to be able to follow someone's mental processes. Go ahead, Patrick.
And yeah, let me, again, I'll just highlight the opposite of this. And it happens to everybody all the time. I'm guilty of it. I bet, Raman, you're probably not guilty of it, but a lot of other people are. When you're listening, one of the worst things you can do in terms of cognitive empathy, or at least a pet peeve that I find, is when someone says at least. The words or the phrase at least is awful. It's putting a silver lining around things that generally are not there to be putting a silver lining around. An example could be something like, oh, I'm so sorry, or, tell somebody I had a miscarriage, and that person says, well, at least you can have a baby, or at least you can be pregnant, right? Those are what I'll call the worst types of, the opposite of having cognitive empathy, because the best way to handle those situations is when someone tells you something negative, rather than trying to frame it for them and turn it into a positive by saying at least this, at least that, just tell them that you understand and you feel with them and you thank them for sharing that with you, as opposed to saying, well, at least you did this, at least you did that. That to me, those are understanding and feeling. Avoiding using a phrase like, well, at least, helps make sure you're doing those two things of engaging cognitive empathy and communicating emotional empathy.
That was great, thank you. Oops. Something's not working here. Let me get back to the shared screen. There we go. So in addition to saying I understand, we communicate emotional empathy by saying I feel. And then the way that we can engage our compassion empathy is when we're picking up on signals. We can infer what they want and what other people need, and we can actually engage in doing something for them. So sometimes people ask us, but the truth is compassionate empathy is when we're doing it proactively. And so we're picking up their signals, we're understanding what they're saying between the lines, and where they might be expressing something that they want or something that they need, but they're not using those words. So it's when we take that extra step.
And Raman, I think right now provides a very, very good opportunity to practice the cognitive empathy. And what I mean by right now is what's going on with the world, COVID-19, right? You're going to start seeing the world open up, different parts of the world in different ways. And I think what's important is to have some empathy for other people, for what they're going through. Forget about your views and what you think. I don't really care what people think, because at the end of the day, you don't know what people are feeling, right? If one mother says, listen, I have to go to work because I can't feed my kids, don't yell at them and say, oh, we're going to kill more people if you go to work. No, have a little bit of empathy for what they're going through. And for those that don't want to leave the house because they're worried about catching a disease, maybe you don't care as much, but that's you. Understand what other people might be going through. Because at this point, in order for our in my opinion, I'm going to get a little political, but in order for our world to get a little better and for people to love each other a little more, they have to understand what other people are going through. Enough arguing about whether we should go back to work or not. No one knows the right answer. Everybody has their own agenda as to what's going on. You know, one of my good friends had a kid, and he didn't let the grandparents come through for the last 2 months. I don't know what it's like to have a baby. So how am I going to be the one to say, how crazy is he for not letting the grandparents go? And so right now, during this time of the world, we have to practice our cognitive empathy and just be kind and try to understand what other people are going through, and be slower to make judgments on what you believe until you try to put yourself in other people's shoes.
Thanks, Patrick. As we kind of come to a close here, if you have any questions, please post them in either in the chat, which again is only coming to us, and you can also use the Q&A feature, where other people can see what the question is. So we've got a little bit more content for you to share with you guys, some more shared experiences and recommendations, and Patrick, feel free to chime in where you'd like. So another way that we can engage empathy is using the emotion wheel. So if at the beginning, when we were sharing that, how each of us felt, if Patrick had some words that might have surprised me or caught me a little bit off guard, that allows me to potentially start engaging my empathy skills. Number one, I can certainly perhaps feel what he is feeling at the time, or I might have the experience of having felt that. And secondly, if I know some more information, I might be able to cognitively understand him and empathize with him. So if, for instance, he had told me earlier today that he was having a tough conversation with someone, and then when we were talking about the emotion wheel, he said that he's feeling anxious or dismayed because of a relationship issue, I would then be able to cognitively empathize with him simply because of the shared emotion that he gave. One little tip on Zoom is there's a feature where you can pin someone's video when when we're in a meeting with someone. So not when we're one-on-one with someone, but if there's like 5 people in the Zoom room, if you hover over at the top, you can click the dots and you can pin someone's video. So that way they occupy your whole screen as opposed to the gallery view. And that way it gives us an opportunity to read people's nonverbals. So for instance, Patrick is someone who's very expressive. And I enjoy watching his nonverbals, and so as a result, I might pin his video if I'm in a group meeting with him, and where I can then pick up on the subtleties of his nonverbals. Because he's so expressive, sometimes it's very obvious, like when he just smiled when I brought his name up. And other times there are like slight changes in his nonverbals that I'm able to pick up only because I've known him for some time and have had a lot of interactions with him over the years. A third way that we can engage our skills is asking other people to share just their experiences, and kind of going beyond the how are you doing, but rather what are you experiencing right now. One of the things that I found myself saying lately is that we're all going through the same experience, but we're experiencing it very differently. And so just because I'm having my experience does not mean that I can assume that other people are having the same experience. So rather than saying, how are you doing? I'd rather say something like, hey, Patrick, tell me what your experience has been like over the last couple of months. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, so I just wanted to finalize with a couple things, Raman. We got 2 minutes, and I wanted to share the why behind this, or at least the why, in my opinion. Why is this important? And the first thing I'll say is, if you don't care about relationships, or you don't care about answering relationships, you probably don't. This doesn't apply to you. The why truly is behind this is to enhance and have better relationships with people. That's the reason. And why do you want to have that? Because it helps you influence and inspire people to do some of the things that you may want to do. And I'm just going to end it by saying one of my proudest moments is I've been the groomsman in I think 7 different weddings. And I had, I think, 15 groomsmen in my wedding, and I've been the best man in, I think, 3 different weddings. None of that would have happened to me if I didn't have empathy for my friends. And I'm so proud to say that I've been a best man 3 times, a groomsman 6 times, and I had 15 guys stand up at my wedding, all guys that I knew from first grade, maybe in middle school. And that's because of my empathy. I've been able to build incredible relationships with these people. And if you want to build better relationships, empathy is one of the ways to get there. Thank you, Raman.
Yeah, and actually, it's just another illustration of the bridge that social awareness has from those first 2 levels of self-awareness and self-management to that 4th level of relationship management. So a couple more tips here is asking people to share the stories that have shaped their life. I have found that this has been dramatic for me. When I hear other people talk about the key periods in their life that made them who they are, it has elevated my ability to empathize to new levels. And so something that I personally do on a regular basis, both in my personal life and in my work life, and has been something very profound. Obviously, it's not something I do with strangers unless I already have seen that they're willing to go a little bit deeper than most first conversations go. During this time, we're hearing all these wonderful stories of people simply acting out on their interests for other people and being compassionate by sending them personal notes, letters, and even gifts, just based on what they're going through. It's one of the things that I've done as well recently, and it's because I picked up on some signals that people sent me. And in one case, someone who said something very explicitly, and I just wasn't able to do anything. I wasn't able to give that person a hug or just make them feel better in person. So it's one of the little things that I thought might be helpful. So just a quick summary here of a few things that I want to highlight is number 1, our antennas are broken right now. It's really hard for us to read people and pick up on signals. And so we've got to change the way that things are being done. And so the way that we communicate has to change. I think one of the things I've found myself doing is just being much more explicit and asking other people to be explicit as well. In addition, I think we, to Patrick's point, we just all need more affirmation and recognition, and to some extent appreciation, which we'll do in a moment. And I think that's something that can help us all empathize with other people, is kind of acting on what we're picking up and affirming how they're feeling, recognizing them for how they're feeling. We don't have to buy them sushi all the time, but simply acknowledging their feelings and emotions can be helpful. So as we come to a close, I just want to share with all of you that our next emotional intelligence webinar is in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be finishing off the levels with relationship management, featuring Kane Grau. And then we're also doing a number of leadership webinars along the way. And so that one is next week, where we're doing a webinar featuring Chris Reuter of Spikeball and how they run their business as a remote company. And then lastly, I just want to share that we do emotional intelligence training here at Sikukunto. And if you have any interest, you're welcome to reach out to me personally and learn more. Happy to kind of share what we do and how we do it. And I want to finish off by Patrick and I sharing appreciations with one another. Want to go first, or you want me to, Patrick?
You can start us off.
All right. Well, I appreciate the growth that you have shown over the last several years. It's just been magical doing that, magical seeing that. But secondly, I appreciate what you talked about with respect to at least. I don't believe I've ever heard that. And that was powerful for me to hear. And so I appreciate learning from you.
Thank you, Raman. I appreciate you challenging me to come out here and talk about my experiences. When you first brought this to my attention, I told you I was not really feeling it. And what you did was you challenged me to dive deeper, and you challenged me to unveil a little more of myself. And one of the things you told me is when you start teaching people, that's when you become an expert. And so I appreciate you challenging me to teach people so that I can become an expert. You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Patrick. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care. TST.com. Try it out. You'll love it.